Today's guest, who is not here yet, but is scheduled to be here at 10:30, is going to be former mayor of High Point, Miss Bernita Sims. She wanted to get on today and talk about housing, homelessness, and poverty, and of course, how that relates to reparations. Now, I want to begin today's podcast by going back to last week and following up with a request that was made from one of our panelists, our co-host, Ms. Constance Reynolds. And oh man, before I forget, um, Constance is our co-host. She's on the line today. We also have one of our other part-time co-hosts, Miss Courtney Alston Wilson. She's shying away from us, but there she is. Hey, good morning to you, Courtney. And then we have our panelists. These are our insights into our discussions every week. We have Jason Hicks. Jason comes with us as community advocate. He's very supportive of the activities going on here in High Point. We have Mr. Thomas Scott. Mr. Scott comes with us from Flex the Vote. And also I have Ken Watts, also with the Flex the Vote. And just let me say today is Reparations Saturday again, guys, sponsored by the High Point NAACP, put on by Flex the Vote. And what we're here is to talk about, reparations. There is a reparations request in the High Point. So we're discussing reparations, how that affects High Point, how it impacts High Point, good, bad, ugly, whatever you want to say. So getting back to our lineup, I'm going to start with Ms. Constance. Ms. Constance posed a very interesting question to us last week at the end of our podcast. And so we'd like to start with that. And so, Constance, I'll let you have it.
All right. So when we finished up last week's conversation, which was amazing, we really delved into the history of the NAACP in the city of High Point and some of the trials and stumbling blocks that we have to overcome and still need to overcome. But we really ended on the note of reimagining what the footprint of the NAACP in High Point can be, what that can look like. And so I asked everyone to think about what are some things that we can do individually, collectively as a team, even to start to move towards coming together in a new way, in a different way, unifying that voice, becoming, building that strength in numbers in our own community. So if anybody has an idea, now's your time. Bring it to the table. Let's talk about it. I have one.
Nobody wants to say anything this morning. Come on. We have spirited conversations all the time. Come on, guys.
Okay. So right after we got off the call, and it's funny how I posed the question and I ran right into the answer. God has a funny sense of humor. But I went to the dollar store on my way to a birthday party, and there was a young man in front of me. He was a teenager, and he had, an arm full of things. And, at the dollar store, which, you can be found all over our communities in High Point. It's a Dollar General or Family Dollar. These are convenience stores that do not sell fresh fruits and vegetables, but packaged goods and things that, you can buy from the freezer, put in the oven. So, he had some cereal, some milk, some food to eat. And I had like a couple of things in my hand, and the young man, he was so kind. He offered for me to step ahead of him. And I said, no, I'm fine. I wasn't in a hurry. I thought that was very kind of him. And I just observed him, and he was very polite to the cashier, and she was very kind to him. And he hurried on out the door, because y'all know last week we had a little bit of snow outside. It was cold. And the cashier was looking behind him after he left the store. And I asked her, does he come in often? He was such a nice young man. And she just, sang his praises, said how good of a kid he was. She mentioned that he takes care of his mother. And Lord, by the time I made it out to the store, he was already hightailed it on back home. But she told me that he walked. And I've asked her to, I left one of my business cards and I asked her to pass that card to him when he comes back into the store. And then it dawned on me that, you know, as an individual, I can make it my business to meet people where they are. You know, either it doesn't have to be, because we usually start with our family, our close friends, our group we're a part of, our network, but it can be literally a stranger on the street. It can be, if you're Black, like Courtney says, you're my brother, you're my sister, we're in this struggle together. And so I think that one step that I could take, and I would challenge you all to take, is to find someone who you don't know and make it your business to introduce yourself and ask where they're coming from, what they do. See if there's something that may come easy to you that they might need help with. I know when I left the store, I went down the street. I went in the opposite direction of where I was going just to try to find him. He was walking fast. And, I slowed down and, I asked him if he could use a ride, and he didn't take a ride. He's a smart kid. But I did, offer my card again since I did catch him. And I told him that I'm from High Point, I work in High Point, and I'm involved in a few groups in the community. And if there's anything he needed help with, to please give me a call and reach out. And, I went on about my day. It only took 10 extra minutes of my day and I moved on. But, that's just planting a seed. And I think that that's something we could look forward to doing with others in our community, one by one.
So this should be the legacy of the NAACP. This should be, what you're saying is something everybody should do. Get to know your neighbor.
Thing everybody could do. Introduce yourself. Mm-hmm. A lot of things that I've noticed when we started doing these interviews and beating the streets and speaking to the community is, our presence, the NAACP's presence in the community. They need to know who we are, what we look like, what we stand for. When you meet people, is that something that you lead with, that you are actually a representative of the NAACP? Or do you wait for it to come up in conversation? So I think that's important that we establish who we are in the community on an individual level as well as a collective level. Yes.
Oh, sorry, Rob.
Oh no, I apologize. Go ahead, Courtney.
There's an old African proverb. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Mm-hmm. Go together. And that's what we're talking about, going together as a group and building our community together and bringing us together.
Okay. Well, I'd like to hear from Ken or Thomas on this issue. I know I've had conversations with these gentlemen in the past about the role of the NAACP and more so what it can be. So Ken, Thomas, you guys are there?
I'm here.
So yeah, good morning.
I think Courtney Constance fairly covered it. I'm for togetherness. I think I was listening to a talk the other day that over a span of somewhere around 30 or 40 years in our history towards the end of slavery, there were over 150 planned and started slave rebellions, and all but one of them, it was a Black person that ratted everybody out to get special treatment. So I think that's kind of just indicative of our need for togetherness and some of the psychological, issues that have been, embedded in us, um, you know, in the killing fields of America.
Yeah, I want to also tag along what Ken just brought up there. I'm not so much a proponent of unification as opposed to us having a code of conduct and us being on, just us being on the same accord with what our end game is, what our objective is, because a lot of us, I mean, there's some of us who are so indoctrinated by the, by the zeitgeist of white supremacy that, to incorporate them into any movement toward progress is a detriment. And Ken he basically gave a stark example of how it was always that one person who wasn't on code that undermined the rest of us. I mean, if there's a critical number of us that are moving in the right direction, in every revolution, it's never the majority of an oppressed people that create or generate the change. Is always a critical number. Look at the Haitian Revolution. Not every slave took up arms against the French. The Bolshevik Revolution, the average Russian was, complacent, was for the monarchy. Mm-hmm. It was a critical number of people that generated that change. Civil rights movement. Hold on, let me finish, Rob. Civil rights movement. Most of these, and I think that's why a lot of our older, our elders, or I don't call them elders, a lot of our seniors in our community don't really want to, they don't talk too much about their involvement in the movement because they weren't really involved in the movement, or they talk about it in the abstract.
You're right.
Because the majority of them were not necessarily they weren't necessarily for a change in the status quo. They believed that we were asking for too much. Yeah, and that's actually documented. We need a critical. So let me just put a button on it, Rob. We need a critical number of people who are on the same page, who adhere to a code of conduct, and we need to understand that at some point we've got to vet people who come into our midst. Not everybody is, people come, they insinuate themselves among us, but they may not necessarily have the same end game in mind.
Well, let's hold it right there, because I want to talk to the the code of conduct. You had mentioned that you're not as opposed to the organization as you are to the code of conduct. So speak a little bit about what that code of conduct is and what it should be as it relates to the NAACP and reparations.
Here for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, one of the things we have to understand, though, is that, and this is one thing I've noticed, an observation, when white people go before the prevailing power structure, they ask for tangibles, they ask for the money. When Black people, we go to that same structure, we ask for programs. For some reason, we get queasy in our stomach when it comes time to ask for tangible resources that are going to actually move the needle in our community. And I'm seeing a lot of our seniors asking for everything or everything that is except something that creates some type of measurable something that any type of measurable results. If you can't if a result cannot be measured or touched, then it's an intangible. I'm seeing a lot of push or for symbolism and not necessarily anything that's substantive. So anything that does not add to our wealth, our power and influence, as a people is, and I said it before, is superfluous. And
Okay, so you're saying the code of conduct then is to ask in a certain tone, ask
no,
for
it's not
certain.
a thing. Well, it does. Here's the point. A lot of times it doesn't matter the tone. It's not a question of the tone in which you ask for things, Rob. It's the fact that you're asking for something that can change a paradigm.
Right, but that's my question. Like, what is the code of conduct? And then what should be our code? Because, if we're talking how to make that change, we've got to have, some, concrete action, in my opinion, because you said code of conduct. So is it the ask? Is it a demand? And how do we get to that point where, it actually, has to make sense? Because I did hear you mention that we have to have that that core group. That's not the word you use, but use a different terminology. But you've got to have individuals, and I'm paraphrasing, that has to be on the same page. That has to know what the goal is, and also have to add in how to get to that goal. Because if we're talking about the code of conduct, how do we change that conduct? Because I
Well,
look at it, and in the capitalist system, that takes money. So we've got to have some backup. We've got to have
well, you know,
something or
well, Rob,
somebody that can
How,
push that.
And I'm glad you asked that, Rob. But I'm,
oh,
I'm
And you
sorry,
hit the
Courtney, go
nail
ahead and
right
answer
on the
that.
head too. It takes
because
money.
Thomas, I'm after you. I'm coming after you. I'm after you, Thomas. Go ahead.
Courtney ready.
Yeah, but
I'm at the
no, I
gate.
mean, you're absolutely right, Rob. My thing is that we need to when we ask for what it is that's gonna create some substantive change in our community, we have to speak plainly, directly, and unapologetic. And those of us who seek to contradict that, whenever we ask, whenever we ask for something, for something that's substantive, there's always those folks who will ask certain things very surreptitiously, like, well, what does that look like?
Okay, wait. Who are those people?
I'm not
Who are
gonna say
those?
any- no. I'm
No, no,
not gonna
no,
say
no, no,
names.
no. I'm not saying by name. I'm saying, like, are these individuals that are in the
Affiliation.
organizations
Yeah,
that
who are they
have the
affiliated with?
influence? Are
In the
these people
organization.
just coming off the street? Are these
Well, I'm
people
talking
who are
about what I've
sent?
seen
Yeah.
within the organization.
Okay.
That in the few
Okay.
meetings that I've seen, they'll surreptitiously undermine the narrative by asking, okay, well, what does that look like? They'll overcomplicate something that's pretty straightforward. We want tangible. One thing, the biggest thing that people have an issue with, and I understand, Ken, it made me aware of the fact that y'all had this conversation. So yesterday, I wasn't able to get on the call, is that reparations, by definition, involves monetary compensation. It is a monetary indemnification. That's where it's been for every group, but for somehow Black people, we want to, when we broach that topic, it's like we undermine ourselves by creating some abstract, convoluted debate on what reparations is. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know what reparations look like? Look at the 2020 stimulus. All it is
Right.
because at the end of the
$3
day,
trillion.
yeah.
They came up with it. Like, where they come up with it from?
Wait. Hold on. Wait a minute. Hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, hold on.
I got to get through this point.
Go ahead, and I'm gonna come right after you.
No,
Basically,
Rob, I got to
it's a
say
number.
something.
Okay,
Oh,
Courtney, I'm going to let Courtney talk because I think she's on the side. I think she knows where I'm going with this.
Go with it. Let's go. Go with it.
Go ahead,
Let me hear it.
Courtney.
It's gonna rattle a cage. I'm prepared always for that though. Let's go back to last week's conversation. We had a conversation last week that we need to really address. And when Thomas spoke of tangibles, we need tangibles in our community. It's the only way we're going to move forward. We talk about money, finance. Finance moves projects. Apparently, when we had the conversation last week, I looked back at the conversation. I wrote down bullets. What has the NAACP of High Point done for Blacks. I took a step out of that one because you don't have enough money to really make a large impact. We have made wonderful strides. We have done wonderful efforts, but tangibly, nothing was on a mass level impactful. We have made a stride in the last 6 months on reparations. Wonderful. I would expect nothing less though. So I'm not going to praise that. Now I'm going to go back to say the tangibles. We need to hold national. If we are so gung-ho on this group, the NAACP, and we're going to put our blood, sweat, and tears into another organization that is not built by our people.
Wait, you talking about the NAACP?
The NAACP,
Okay,
who were the founders of the NAACP, not who were the financial backers of the NAACP.
Gotcha.
Not who did they accept in and allow to run the organization.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yep.
So when we look at who finances and who funds this organization now, it's not Black people funding it. So how far are they going to move the needle? How far have they moved the needle in High Point, North Carolina? Who's it from national coming here to assist us with this reparations? Because this is not the first time. Who from Incofa? I'm asking questions. Who from Incofa, or who have we consulted with? Incofa is the Organization for Reparations of America. It is the oldest organization, made in 1980. Have we consulted anyone nationally? Has nationally come down and helped us, assisted us? Have they helped us with billboards? Have they helped us with commercials? We're talking about funding and finance. We don't have the infrastructure in these small branches to make a change.
Okay.
It's asinine for us to think that we're going to move the needle forward when we don't have enough structure behind us, enough power, enough finance behind us to move the needle forward.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, again, we welcome everyone to Reparations Saturdays. Man, if you're missing this, you're missing some good information. So I want to just chime in real quick and interrupt the speakers in my panel, because you guys, y'all are the foundation that makes this happen. So I just want to point out, we want to try and make sure everyone here is going to be able to have their 2 or 3 minutes, because we want to make sure that we get all of this information in. And I think we're recording, but I want to make sure we get this information down, guys, because what Courtney just said, it actually hits on a little something that's deeper than just putting it in front of the City Council of High Point. How far is it going to go? What are we really impacting as we go down this road? I want everybody to think about that, because what she just said made total sense. Like, why don't we have more presence on something that is so historic right here in little bitty High Point? Why don't we have national bringing us the resources we have? Because this is epic. This is supposed to be that historical moment for us. Where's that support at? Because in capitalist America, you got to have some money if you want to make an impact. You've got to have, some media machine. You've got to have communications. You've got to have something that puts the message out that, lets people know, what is this reparations? So, excuse me, I just want to get that out real quick. And thank you, Courtney, for that piece, because I'd like to ask of the panel, where's the money, people? Where are we going to get the money from? Because if we're talking reparations and it's about the money, where are we going to get it from? Anybody? Floor is open.
Well, I want to say this. Regardless about where the money comes from, this is what I would say. On the issue of togetherness. And Courtney brought up a very powerful point about getting the support that an issue like this deserves. Now, very recently, we were told by our religious affairs coordinator that a lot of the Black pastors here in High Point won't allow for a few minutes to be devoted to announcing to their congregations information about this reparations campaign, as if, you know, it's superfluous and doesn't affect them. You know, no, most of the black folks that I know in the church, you
Hold on one
know,
second.
are struggling with a little something, you know, and we can't even get, you know, a few minutes to talk about, you know, hey, this could, you know, if we get this through, you know, this could change your life in a positive way. You know, so
Okay.
I'm just saying, you know, that's the, you know, that's the bottom level. You know, so if you went to church, if you go to church tomorrow and you don't see the NAACP announcement, you know, informing you and your brothers and sisters in Christ about the reparations campaign at High Point, then I think you and your pastor might need to talk about something a little there.
Okay, hold that
that's a
for 1 second,
suggestion.
Ken. Hold that for 1 second. Tony, you have a question.
No question. Let Ken finish his comment.
Okay, excellent. Ken, back to you.
Oh no, that's it. I'm just saying,
Okay.
if you go to church tomorrow and you don't hear about reparations, you and your pastor got something to talk about.
All right. Mr. Graham, it's on you.
Thank you, sir. As always, just awesome discussion. This, I think Courtney has alluded to that. That's a totally separate like conversation, because that is a definite foundation of our community. We spend a lot of money in tithing. We spend a lot of money in restoring our facilities when it comes to our religious entities in the community, whatever. But when we're talking about the money, right? We have to reach out to our talented 10th, as a lot of people like to say. We, I don't know how many people here have attended college, but most of us, I think, have, and a lot of us may have even moved away and come back. I for one, lived in Mobile, Alabama for 10 years before I moved back to High Point. Got a perspective from a different culture, different way of doing things. Those conversations need to be had, and the togetherness piece, I think Thomas kind of spoke to it, is that we work hard in silos. We need to figure out how and when do we bring forth those. Right now we have a reparations committee, right? We have selected this committee. We have agreed that these individuals will represent our branch. We have trusted them to carry the banner, if you will, of reparations for our community. And we just have to be transparent. Like, what do we want? Like, if we're talking about money, let's talk about some of these companies that have benefited in High Point. Let's talk about the Millis corporations and the Henry Dons and the, you know what I'm saying? Let's go down the list of all of the different entities that have benefited off of low wages, with high return and profits. Rob, you speak to it all the time about we live in a capitalist society. So we have to look at it, if we're talking about money, from the approach of reparations is making us whole, right? We're trying to be made whole. We're repairing something that has been broken. And it started out broken. It was designed broken. You see what I'm saying? So if you do not speak to these things specifically, and the ask has something tangible and concrete, calling these people out and letting them know that, look, y'all have benefited where we haven't. We haven't had any minority vendors in any of your institutions that have been able to generate wealth for their families and their communities, but yet you sell your products, your services to us you know, at large quantities. I mean, it's a lot, man. It's a lot. And having these entities that I'm not even aware of, but I'm sure the committee is aware of, some of these people like in Evansville, Illinois, and Asheville, who did they speak to? You know what I'm saying? Who have other communities that are looking at the same, they're in the same position that we're in exploring reparations. Who are they consulting and working with to move the needle forward? So those are just some topics that we need to get some answers for.
Hey, Rob, I know that our guest is just into the call. I did want to add something to what Tony just said, because I do agree with the brother. For the most part, there are maybe a couple of admonishments I want to put forth regarding, particularly when you talk about the talented 10th, and I mentioned something about a code of conduct. Identifying those who seek to undermine us. A lot of times, many of those people are part of our talented 10th. And a lot of and the reason behind that is because many of them, and this deals with the fact that we don't have an independent economy of our own. Many of them are employed by the same system that works against us, or they have interests that are tied into that very system. So when you talk about how, when Kim brought up the Black ministers in High Point and how they've been very sheepish on the issue of reparations, and some of them have just stonewalled the idea altogether. That's our talented 10. That's our elite. I mean, that's and we have to understand that the narrative as it exists right now, it didn't emanate from these people. It emanated from the grassroots. It emanated particularly on social media. That's where the narrative started. And a lot of times what we're seeing is that, especially with our people in media, Blacks in media, they've gotten put in a situation where they have to co-opt the language of the grassroots, of the streets. But at the same time, it's to an extent that it only allows them to rein in or take over the narrative and redirect it.
Well,
our talented 10th in many cases are the very ones that undermine.
well, okay, we'll get to that because I think it's a valid point when we're talking about, where's the money? Where is it coming from? Because we have to look at this as a whole. Because remember, reparations, as we've established, it's monetary, but it's also education. And so with that, I'm going to segue into our guest. She has just joined us. She is a native of High Point. You could say she's an ambassador. She is a former mayor, and she's coming to us today, guys. She's going to focus this conversation around the housing, homelessness, and poverty. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ms. Bernita Sims, former mayor, High Point, North Carolina.
Former mayor of High Point, first Black mayor of High Point, first Black female mayor of High Point. Come on, somebody.
Come on, get it. There you go.
Welcome.
Lord have mercy. All this love I'm feeling, I get it.
Yes,
I
earn your
get it.
flowers while you are here.
Well, good morning, everybody. And again, I appreciate you all allowing me to join you this morning and kind of speak to some things that are resonating in our community and across the country that we're having very limited conversation about. And because I work in this sphere every day, I think it's important that we start looking at how we're moving sort of backwards in this whole conversation. We're talking about reparations. At the same time, there are many of us who believe that we have arrived and that we are in communities where we're making good money. We're achieving those things that beyond the 40 acres and a mule, that we are keeping up with the Joneses and that we're doing well. But at the same time, we have highly marginalized populations in our community that are not doing so well. And so I want to talk a little bit about what poverty looks like in our in our state and in our county and across the country, how what has happened with this pandemic that has moved the needle, but not moved the needle at the same time. And then to look at what's going on with our homeless population in our communities and how people, because of COVID and because of the things that have been put in place by our federal government, have actually created a homeless population that's far beyond what any of us can imagine. And so I'm going to start first with the homelessness piece in Guilford County and across the country. As a result of COVID, many of our shelters that exist in our communities were reduced to 50% of shelter placement in those communities. So where they were at one level, they're now 50% of whatever that level is. So it has decreased the number of shelter beds that are available. And as a result, of course, now people are on the street and they're creating waiting lists and they're referring people to hotels on a temporary basis, but there's no housing available for these individuals. The second part of that is as a result of what has happened with the rental situation and the moratorium on housing and on evictions. Now that that has been lifted, we find families and individuals being displaced at a rapid rate. So every one of those pending evictions that were in the court system, they're now acting on them. So every day, every week, we have 75 or more cases that are pending in our court system where people are up for eviction for non-payment of rent. All of this created as a result of the pandemic and the fact that there was again, that moratorium. And when people were given those stimulus dollars and all of that, of course, they were told, go out and stimulate the economy. Don't save, don't hoard, don't do any of that. Just stimulate the economy. So they went out and they did exactly that. They stimulated the economy, but they didn't pay their rent and utilities. So when it came back with these ERAP dollars, which were the federal dollars that were given to the states and the counties and said, okay, you guys help these people with their rental payments. And they were told that they would pay up to almost up to a year of rent if you apply for these dollars. Well, that was a good thing. Folk went in, they applied, but guess what? The bottleneck happened when they couldn't get the money out on the street fast enough. So it started with the HOPE dollars that were at the state level. For whatever reason, United Way and 211 couldn't deploy those dollars in a timely fashion. So landlords found themselves waiting 4, 5, 6, 8 months for those payments. Once the moratorium lifted, landlords said, okay, I still don't have my money. I don't really trust the government. That's what we say. We don't trust the government. So I'm going to go ahead and execute my eviction. I want my unit back. So, you know, we have created in this, in the United States, and particularly in this community, that perfect storm. Because not only are the landlords proceeding with the evictions, but they're also saying, we really don't want the money. Because now we are in an economy that is improving to the degree that at this point, if I put you out of my unit, I can now raise my rent and get more money and not have to deal with you and whatever your situation is. So now we've got these individuals who can't stay where they are. We've got these individuals that they're saying, don't want your money, find someplace else to go. We have individuals who can't afford to go anyplace else. So the availability of the housing stock is huge. Perfect storm. Now we have another whole group of homeless individuals that are out there saying, I can't afford to move. So where a landlord would say, my rental unit is $800, $900, that same unit is now renting for $1,200, $1,500, $1,600 a month because it can. So we've got this issue in our community that exists, not enough housing stock, individuals not working, making enough money to be able to afford to pay it. And even down to the situation where these housing vouchers that they get that will help and assist pay for that money, pay for that rental unit is now not enough money because it doesn't represent fair market rents. And fair market rents at this point are again at that level I just said to you, between $1,200 and $1,500, $1,600 a month. So we got an issue. We have an issue. And some of this was even happening before the pandemic. It was moving in a direction before the pandemic even happened. So the pandemic has just exacerbated that whole situation in our community. So again, this is not a conversation that people are talking about. So if you pick up your newspaper, you listen to your radio, you may every once in a while see something about homelessness on the television, national news when you tune in, but that's not the story of the day about what is happening to individuals, families, children. Let's talk about children that are in this mix as well. So these kids are out here now. Public school system says wherever that child is in school, they'll continue to be in that same school, regardless of their situation. So we get calls all the time, mother, 5 children sleeping in the car. A mother who now has her disabled son living with her, but oh, by the way, she doesn't have anywhere to go. So they're going to evict her. I'm in my unit and I need help paying my rent, but my landlord has said he's not going to renew my lease. So if I pay my rent, I still have to figure out where I am going to go because they're saying I'm not renewing the lease. It is crazy out here, folks, and we're not having these conversations. It's not happening. And I'm sure all of you know, or have come into contact with somebody over the last few months that has told you, I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know where I'm going to live. Can you imagine children sleeping in cars? And their parents trying to work and still navigate all of these waters. So I think that when it comes to housing, that is definitely a conversation we need to be having. We need to be having it in light of where we are with the whole reparations agenda, creating housing that is affordable, not affordable housing, because those are two different things. So affordable housing says if I make $100,000 a year, I should be able to buy me a $200,000 house in any community in our city or in our county. Well, that makes sense. What about housing that is affordable? That's the person who makes the $50,000 a year. How am I able to afford to pay for a house, buy a house, and house my family at the same time? So that's a whole different conversation, and that's something that we don't have. The political will is not present for us to sit back and say to developers when they come into our community, you have to put that housing that is affordable component in your development when you build. So if I'm building a community that is $250,000 homes, I can easily put in 5 homes that can be affordable to individuals moving in, and nobody in that community knows that this has been set aside in that development unless somebody tells them. You see, that's how we create housing stock that allows individuals to live like everybody else. That's that piece where we say we're going to help individuals in our community around housing be able to live like everybody else. But the political will is not there. So that's one of the things that I think in our community we need to be having conversations about. Okay, second thing, and I don't know if there are questions around that or if there's an opportunity. I think you said there's a roundtable at the end that we can have these sort of conversations and we can delve off into it a little bit deeper.
I'm sorry, Ms. Sims, but yeah, I have a question. And I think you've answered it, but I'll wait to the roundtable, but I'll put it out there. You know, how can this reparations for High Point help to get some of that for this community? But I'll wait to the roundtable. I just put it out there.
Okay. All right. The second part of my discussion has to do with poverty. And so, you know, the Bible says the poor will always be amongst us. That's what it says. And that is a true statement. Individuals from time to time, I mean, they're always going to be there. People, things are going to happen in cycles. And so when we look at where we are with poverty in our nation, but let's not do that. Let's drill it on down to where we are in our community, poverty in our community. We all know, those of us who were born and raised in High Point understand the mill concept that existed in this community. And the mill concept had individuals coming in, working on the lines, doing production, the whole 9 yards, with no real commitment to education. So at one point in time where there were conversations around assisting individuals who were in these mill and factory situations to say, can we come in and at least get these individuals their GEDs? Because a lot of these people were coming with third and fourth and fifth grade educations working in these factories. There was a reluctance on the part of the factories to do that, because if I educate them, they will leave me. If we educate these people, they will not stay. And so our community was built on this whole mill concept. So individuals who were from this community understood it, but we were also getting individuals from other parts of the state coming in to High Point, because their frame of reference was, you come to High Point, you get a job in the mill, it's going to create I'll have a better living circumstance if I'm working, even though we know what those rates of pay were. So we fast forward to now, we still have in our community a level of poverty, and right now it's about 16% of the individuals who live in Guilford County live in poverty. I would hazard to say that if we looked at the rate of poverty in High Point, it's going to be significantly higher, because we know that is a blended rate across the county. If we look at the state of poverty in the United States, it's somewhere around 14%, 15% of people in the United States that live in poverty. So this whole poverty concept, when we look at it, talks about individuals' ability to rise above, make a thriving wage to take care of their families. So the living wage component says a single parent and 3 children would have to make $50,000 a year in this community in order to be free of all supportive services. That means Medicaid, food stamps, any type of housing vouchers, all of that. That family would have to make at least $50,000 a year in order to have a living wage and be able to do what they need to do. Okay, so we look at the jobs that are available. Where are they at $50,000 a year that allows that parent or a 2-parent household to be able to thrive? And so living wage, I think, is a misnomer. A thriving wage says, I'm able to take my children out to the movies. I'm able to go out and participate in activities with my kids. We're able to live like all other Americans live, and that's the American dream, that I can do these things with my children. A living wage says I can pay all my bills. I can feed myself, but it doesn't allow for the other things that are looked at as prosperity in our community. So with poverty, we have now since the pandemic, it dipped a little bit when all that stimulus money was out there. So everybody was getting money, everybody was getting checks, unemployment was paying all this money. I, for one, think all of that was the wrong way to approach what we did, but that's just my perception on the back end of how we delivered services. It should have been done a different way, but be that as it may, what's done is done. We cannot fix it. But what we have created at this point is our individuals who say, some people, let me go back. Some people through unemployment were making more money through unemployment than they were making when they were working. So that created a mindset that says, I don't need to go back to work. I can sit at home, I can draw this money, and I'll be fine. But as always, good things always come to an end. So now we're at the end of that. And you have employers that have said, we're willing to increase what the minimum wage is that we will bring people in, because we need people. We're desperate for individuals to come to work. So the wage went from $16 an hour to $17. You have some companies paying $19, some paying $21 an hour to get people into the workforce with them. But we can't find people who are willing to go to work. So even though in our program, our training program, we do CDL licensing, we have a construction program, can I get anybody in construction? And that's one of the booming businesses that we see out here now. Can I get any individuals to sign up to do a 5-week course to get certifications and credentials in construction? So now the whole conversation is in our community is, what do we do? And we know that if you get people to a certain wage level, it does impact poverty in our community. But our poverty is so systemic that if you don't change systems around poverty, it's not going to change. We have created situations with public housing, with our food stamps, President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty came back and said, we're going to have all of these agencies like ours and others that we're going to put into place that's going to help families rise above where they are now, that pulled them up by their bootstraps conversation, that they're going to do better and they're going to thrive in this environment. But sometimes you can enable people not to do well. And so part of what we did with that war on poverty was to enable people not to do well. So public housing was not meant to be the end all to what happens. Now we have generational folk in public housing. How do we do this? We have generational folk who said, I can't feed my family, so therefore I'm going to need, we went from people getting, what do they call, welfare food. Then we went from the food to the paper stamps. Then we went from the paper stamps to the card that you can go in and purchase with. And at this point, people sell more stamps than they use.
EBT.
We have individuals out there, because of the crisis in our community, they have tripled some of that food stamps that they give to folks, saying we're going to make sure nobody starves. Well, you're giving people more stamps than they can ever use. So what does it become? It becomes a tradable commodity. I can give you my card because I've got $8,000 worth of food stamps on here I know I'm not going to use. And the other part of that, to Courtney, is we got folk who don't know how to cook fresh foods and fresh vegetables, have no clue about how to feed their children. So if it's not microwavable, if you can't put it in the oven and heat it up, they don't know what to do with it. So this all goes back to our whole situation around how we deal with, and nobody asked us how we deal with poverty. Nobody asked African-American folk, what's the best way to deal with our folk? Because Hispanic people will tell you some of this stuff y'all give us, we're not going to eat because that's not in their cultural diet. You can't work with it. But we never, as Black folks said, this is stuff we don't eat. It's not in our cultural diet. So now we're with Pop-Tarts, stuff that comes in a can, you open it up and you heat it up. That's what our children been raised on. All this sugar and all this other stuff. So our kids are out of control. And we want to know what's wrong in our community. And I can't speak for other folk. I can speak for our community. I know how I was raised and I know what I was raised up on. And I didn't know what McDonald's was until they integrated schools and the white kids were leaving the campus to go to McDonald's for lunch. I never knew what that was.
Amen to that. That's how I learned Taco Bell. I
And
never
I
knew
am
Taco
right here
Bell.
in this community. Didn't know what that was. So now we're into the whole fast food culture and the whole 9 yards. At some point, as African Americans, if we want to take control of what's happening with our families and our children, we need to be having a different dialogue about poverty and how we address poverty in our community and what it means. You put people all in one place, which is what they did. The Nazis did to the Jews. They put them in a place and they called it ghettos. And so we are creating those very same systems in our own communities where we put all people that are in poverty in one location. Go look. You look at the census tracts where poverty is most prevalent in our communities. It's not spread out. It's all concentrated in one area. So you're going to get what you get unless we start having a different conversation about what our communities need to look like. And you can ride through any of these communities off East Green Street, south side of High Point. They've thrown some stuff at this and said, we're going to go in and create housing. They did it in Macedonia, but you didn't fix what was around it. The same thing on South Side. You put housing on South Side, you're throwing stuff at us, but you didn't fix what was wrong. That's why you find individuals with gun caches in the attics of these houses that they're building, or people still being afraid to purchase in those neighborhoods. I'm not living over here. I have a friend who has a house for rent over there. The house got shot up 3 times. Had nothing to do with the person living in the house. They just happened to be in the wrong house. So she says, I got to get rid of this property because at this point, I can't continue to fix this property because of what's happening. So it's a big issue. It's a big conversation, but it needs to be a conversation that we're having and that we're talking about, because if we don't do that, we can talk reparations all day long, but we need to start educating ourselves about what's best for our communities, what's best for our families, and what we need to do as a community to pull ourselves up. We can't work with everybody else, even though it is an everybody else situation. And I'm not minimizing that there are all races that are in poverty. I don't want to forget that that's true. But at this point, we have to be single focused on what we do about a community that looks like us. How do we educate our folk? Yes, ma'am. So I'm done.
Okay, come on, Sam.
Come on, man. Y'all got to get out.
Better.
That was pretty good. That was pretty good.
Hey.
And I mean, I'd like to thank Ms. Sims for coming on, because that, kind of hit at the root of what we always talk about. And so I'm going to open this up to my panel real quick. I know I got limited time with Ms. Sims, but anyone, if you got a question, let's hear it. I got the first one. I hope I'm going to take it since I got the mic. How can reparations work to help this condition that you just spoke about here in High Point, with, a livable, affordable housing versus how, what did you say? You said a living wage versus a thriving wage, and housing that's affordable versus affordable housing. How can reparations help ours in this community?
Well, in my opinion and my observation, the city of High Point has access to millions of dollars that can be programmed to address all of these things that we're talking about. So when we look at a community where a grocery store is removed and not replaced, and the city says, well, that's really not what we're into, but it is, because we're all citizens in your community. In my opinion, a baseball stadium is not what we're into, but you did it. You made it happen. You put it together. Is that what cities do? Absolutely not. So when you start spending that kind of money, you have to look at how does it impact and how does it support the entire community. So case in point with the stadium, there was an opportunity with that baseball stadium for us to look at building affordable housing around the stadium. There was an opportunity to do that. Our elected body said, no, that's not what we're going to do. So they backed off of the plan that would have allowed that to happen, because they wanted in their minds to build upscale housing around that stadium. They did not want to be responsible for putting in housing that did not lend itself to what that whole baseball stadium concept looks like around downtown living. And so as a result of that, that didn't happen. So we displaced things in that community, but we put back something totally different. So there are opportunities. The RAISE grant that they got last year, which was a transportation related grant. The RAISE grant, they brought in and said, okay, what we're going to do with this money is we're going to channel the dollars, or not channel, but we're going to focus these dollars on completing the Greenway in Southwest High Point. And this is going to provide walkable spaces for people who live in that community in the whole 9 yards. But the RAISE grant for transportation could have also been used to create connectivity around bus transportation and how we move people movers from A to B, B to C, C to D. So now that we have started this process of building or enticing or incentivizing companies to come into our community to create these big jobs, or these big boxes and others that have these jobs, we don't have a way to get people there. So for us to for anybody in this community to move from High Point to Greensboro takes you a good hour and a half. We know how far that is, right? Because I live in High Point. I work in East Greensboro. I can get to work in 20 minutes in my car. But it takes you an hour and a half to move from High Point to Greensboro. When are we going to look at our transportation system and say, how do we make this simpler for people to get to the jobs that we're incentivizing? So what ends up happening is you're spending taxpayer dollars in Guilford County. You're spending taxpayer dollars at the state level to create jobs that may or may not benefit us in this community, because we're in a 12 county region. And guess what? All those folk in rural America, they got cars. So they can, a rural North Carolina, a rural triad, they can get in their cars and they can drive to Colfax. They can get in their cars and they can drive to East Green.
What is it? Why are they able to afford cars? Because they have generational wealth.
So at the end of the day, we're not talking enough about those things that impact poor people in our community. So
So,
these, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask, so how can this reparations that we have here in High Point, how can it address that?
It can create targeted transportation. It can relook at our transportation system and say, instead of us having these segregated systems, which is what we have, High Point has a system, Greensboro has a system, and then there's PART. But in any thriving community, you have one system. New York doesn't have, they have 8 boroughs or whatever that is. They don't have 8 different transportation systems in New York. They have one. Atlanta, it doesn't have 5 or 6 or 7 different systems. It has one. And so our system needs to be one system that connects things. Before Washington, D.C. had the subway system, they had just primarily a bus system. That's all they had. But you could get on a bus in Southeast Washington and you could get to downtown Washington in 20 minutes because of express buses and things of that nature, creating hubs that connect the way it should be. Our transportation system sucks.
So are you saying that Guilford County, High Point, has the money to sustain such an idea?
I think that they have, it's the willingness to do it. So right now, the High Point gets federal dollars for transportation. Greensboro gets federal dollars for transportation. Guilford County gets federal dollars for transportation. And then there's PART. So PART gets federal dollars as well. But PART needs all of that money in order for it to function the way that it should. Plus the different communities, municipalities putting monies into that system as well. But nobody wants to say, I give. So when you start talking about this in conversation, everybody says, well, you know, I don't think that's what we need to do. Come on, y'all.
So now, are you saying that PART should be separate from a regional system, or should it all encompass
PART should
one?
be our transportation system, period.
Gotcha.
There should be no high trans. There should
Gotcha.
be no whatever Greensboro's called. Even Winston, there should be no that. So if you all can come together and incentivize companies to come in, you should come together and figure out how you're going to get people to the jobs.
Ooh.
I have a question. We were discussing, Ms. Sims, before you joined us, a code of conduct that should be required as we look into demanding these changes that our community needs. So how do we have these conversations? Who do we bring them up to? How do we bring them up within the NAACP, within our strives for reparations, and even on an individual level? What are the things that we need to be doing to make it our business that these conversations are being had and following up to hold the powers that be accountable?
Well, I look at all of this as being a process of activism. And so we have these elected folk that represent us, and they're the ones that are voting on these decisions as they're being made. How often do we email, pick up the phone, call our representatives and say, hey, look, I understand that you all considering X. Let me give you my thoughts on what that is. See, we're not an activist community. And as a result of that, we have individuals who sit at those dais and make those decisions. They don't get input from us. And by the time the input does happen, guess what? The decision's already made. And so in a lot of instances, we don't study ourselves approved about what's happening in our community. We don't read, we don't look. We have a joke of a newspaper in High Point. I'm just being honest. when it comes down to reporting news. And so by the time they get a hold of it, the vote is happening that Monday night at council. Or it's happening that Thursday night at the county commissioners, or Tuesday night, or it's happening whatever night it is at the school board. It's already done. And we're on the back end of it because, and I think there needs to be a two-way street. The individuals who we elect ought to be informing their constituents of what's happening as well. And you find in any other large cities, there's a newsletter, there is a blog page, there is something out there that they put out there. This is what we're studying. This is what's coming before us. Give me your thoughts. Let us know how you feel about what this is. So it's a closed kind of situation that isn't closed, if you understand what I'm saying. They have these, we have closed meetings where they go in, and it's not open to the public as they're talking about incentives to companies and what that looks like, and who's asking the question saying, what are the jobs going to pay? And they'll go in and they'll give you some kind of blended rate, and they'll put upper management and all that stuff, executive salaries in with the folk at the lower end of the totem pole, and they'll give you blended rates that, oh, it pays this amount. No, it doesn't. What's your entry level salary? So you have to reframe the question when you're asking. Give us the percent of minorities that are in your company right now. How many minorities do you have? What is the breakdown on that minority workforce that you say you have? And then you'll find that, okay, like Asplund Tree Service that comes in our community and cuts down our trees and actually massacres the trees. That's what I'm going to say. So they come into our community to cut down these trees. Well, you look at them and say, what's the diversity of your workforce?
And
They
let's
can
be
tell you
careful
how
with
many
that
women.
word minority, Benita. Let's be careful with that word minority, because does it include our community when we speak of minority? Or is that, these are different. This is how the government can't track if Blacks are succeeding or where Blacks really stand, because we have the word minority, BIPOC. They have separated us into 3 different groups now. So are we minority?
Well, at this point, it does get drilled down into it. So when you go to when you stand there and tell them, ask them specifically about their diversity, they will give you a number. And then you go back and say, what does that number represent in terms of race? And guess what you find? There are 15 women that work for us, and there are no Blacks. When they have to break it down, they'll tell you, you're absolutely right. There are no African Americans who work for us. And they base that on their home office, which is somewhere in Virginia. But they come into our communities and do the work. So if you drive by any place where you see the little orange thing sitting on the road and they're cutting down trees, you're never going to see anybody that looks like us. There's no forced requirement for them to hire people in the community where they're doing this work. You see, we're not pushing that envelope. And when we get individuals in some of our municipal positions, some of them end up, through no fault of their own, being gatekeepers. They present a look that says, oh yeah, I mean, in the management and director's position, we got all these people, but they're not decision makers. They don't make decisions. They just
get so much
represent.
pushback. Yes.
Hold on for a second. I have a question to that gatekeeper comment, but first we have a question from one of our panelists, Mr. Graham. Go for it.
So, thank you. I'm hearing a lot about our municipal elected officials. To what degree, and this has always been an open candid forum from what I understand, to what degree have they been engaged in this process prior to September? To what degree do we entrust them to even assist with the conversation? You know what I mean? And I'm saying that to say, back in 19, when we made history with 4 Black councilmen, they had agreed to do like a community forum, if you will, I think at one time. And of course we had the pandemic in the initial phases, but as we see, we can meet in other ways, right? So can you help me understand their engagement in this process? Because it seems pretty much vital at this juncture if we're going to be.
Okay, but before you speak, Ms. Sims, I forgot to inform our audience. Ms. Sims comes to us from the High Point NAACP, and she is a part of a working group that's establishing the request to the city of High Point for reparations. So I just want to point that out. Ms. Sims, it's all yours.
So to answer your question, Mr. Graham, when we first started this process, we did not leave them out in terms of informing where we were headed as the NAACP in this reparations agenda. So they were aware of the conversation that was taking place and our desire to move forward with a reparations agenda with the city of High Point. So they weren't left in the dark. But as in all things, when you're working through a process, and in some instances, not in some instances, in all instances where we reached out, they were supportive of what we were doing and what we were seeking to establish as we moved through this process. So they were not absent from the conversation, let me say that. But what we did do was not necessarily put them in a position that would impact or alter the other items that they had on their agenda when they came into office as they were moving forward. So once we informed them, and that was really our only, I think, obligation to them, is to let them know it was coming. Now, in terms of how we formed or framed the resolution and how all that was done, that was absent of them. It was strictly an NAACP process, and as we move forward down that road. So those gentlemen were not involved in that conversation at all, as far as how we constructed the resolution, how we came up with the information that was contained in the information, nor in helping us to craft and draft what that was going to look like. But they were aware.
Gotcha. I guess more so because I know, you know, I guess what's the right way to put it? They can't implicate themselves, if you will, so much maybe, but I mean, you know that body, right? You know, we go way back, and you know, I have the utmost respect for you and what you and others have done from a political standpoint. But I guess more of my question is, how do we engage them? How do we make sure that our allies on the inside are giving us the information, helping us through this process? Maybe not so much the drafting of it, but making sure that, you know, we have the insight that we need currently. You know what I mean?
Well,
I'm just wondering.
They are solidly behind what we're doing. I mean, there has never been any wavering on the part of those elected folks as it relates to what we're asking for. So when you have those conversations with them, not one of them has ever said, we don't believe we should move forward with this. We don't believe this needs to happen. We don't believe that, you know, the way that you're presenting in this is the correct way to present it. I mean, in fact, for those of you that were at the meeting in September when we first presented this resolution, Cyril pretty much said, we're going to do this. You know, so let's just figure out how we make it happen. Tell me how to craft and draft the motion so that we can move forward with the consideration of this resolution. So there's never been any real wavering on the part of the council members. And so I don't believe that any of them are at this point in a position where they think it's a negative thing for our community. I don't believe that. And so the issue is knowing where the individuals on council who do not look like the four stand in this process. And so we do understand Wesley Hudson very much supportive of where we're heading with this. But we also have to keep in the back of our mind, this is all political, guys. And so people do things for a reason. They support things for a reason. And so we just have to make sure that in the process of what we do, we don't get used for somebody else's political aims or gains as this happens. So, you know, that we just have to stay woke. That's what I say. You know, stay woke, because they making decisions. Decisions are being made while we sleep. Conversations are taking place absent all of us being in the room. And so, and we know this. So we have to just make sure that we understand what that is. And when things come to you, be able to decipher what all that is before, you know, we buy in and say, oh yeah, that's great. Well, is it great?
We have a question on the floor. Mr. Hicks.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, kind of speak to what Tony said, and then, you know, Miss Sims' rebuttal. My position is it would be more beneficial to engage the community instead of city council, because what I've found, you know, in the past, you know, 3 or 4 months, you know, or 2 to 3 months, is when I've talked to people in the community about what the NAACP is doing about reparations, or doing with reparations. There's this kind of surprise, this unknown, as if no one knew. And I don't think that it's the city's responsibility to disclose that. I think it's more the branches, and that's changed, because originally I was of the mindset that, you know, that the city's going to be the one to push this forth. I mean, with the branch kind of pushing, but I was thinking, you know, my original thought was, why is members of city council not letting the community know that they're, you know, pushing, or that they're involved in this reparations process? And I just thought about it, and I was like, well, you know, they're not really responsible for it. Only, you know, to a degree they are, but ultimately the branch has been the push of this thing. So I think it would be better to engage the community. And then a kind of a follow-up from earlier is, you know, I know we talked about housing and poverty and rental displacement, and, you know, poverty in High Point's nearly 18%, which is higher than Guilford County as a whole. But I was curious, like, what are some of the solutions now that we've talked about the problem? And is that solely reparations, or is it bigger than that? Because my life experience, which is separate from everyone else's, but my life experience is that even at, you know, say $40,000 in the city of High Point, or even $50,000, you still got to have, you know, some sense of financial literacy to still sustain and, you know, maintain a certain lifestyle, and it's not a prosperous lifestyle at that. So, you know, what are some of the solutions that should be looked at as we move forward?
Well, you know, again, there are dozens of, start with the latter and I'll go back to the first. There are dozens of programs out here that are working with individuals, trying to move families, and working with individuals and families to move them to self-sufficiency. Part of what happens is our community doesn't take advantage of the services that are there. So during this whole pandemic, the bulk of the individuals that came into our organization, they weren't looking for job training and to go to work. They were looking for somebody to help them pay their rent and utilities. And so when we offered and said, well, you know, we see you're in this situation, would you be interested in joining our training programs and having us put you back to work and all this? That wasn't their focus. So there was always a reason why I can't go back to work. Well, you know, my children, and they're legitimate reasons. When the school wasn't open and, you know, they had to deal with, the distance learning and all of that, those were legitimate reasons as to why, you know, they couldn't go back to work, or work was not an option for them. And then the whole discussion of COVID by itself that says, you know, I have to protect my family and my kids, because if I put folk in an environment where they're working and there are no protocols in place, what does that do if I get COVID? So it was that whole fear around what was going on with COVID. But now we see through CDC guidelines and the whole opportunity for vaccination and how vaccination impacts COVID, and the fact that you may get it, but it may not be that COVID that we had 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. So these are all conversations we need to be informed about. But I think that, as I said before, with poverty, it's that little nebulous thing that, you know, it has to be a will within the individual to say, this is what I want for me. And we have to be creating those conversations that say, don't you want a better life for your children? Because those of us on this call that are my age and maybe a little younger always looked at, I don't want to live the same lifestyle that my parents did. I don't want to have this hard scrabble life where, you know, we didn't have this and this and this and this. I never knew we were necessarily poor when I was growing up. We ate every day. We lived in a house. The heat was on, the lights were on. All of that happened. I didn't know we were poor.
Because it was a way of life. My mom didn't know she was poor until what was that? Sociology in college. When she looked at what they were talking about, she put herself in those same shoes.
So, you know, we did what we had to do, and we survived. It was a sense of survival in it, but at the same time, we learned certain values and all of that. So everybody said, I want my child to have a college education because I don't want them to have to live like me. That was the push. I want my child to be educated. I don't want them to have to live like me. But we had some very smart Black folk that never had a high school diploma, and they amassed wealth, no high school diploma. The thing around financial literacy, Jason, they knew this instinctively and survived through that process. And so it's a big conversation. And as I said before, you can only tackle this. The way that we're doing it tackles the problem one person at a time. The way that it should be done is systemic change. See, you have to create changes at a system level in order to really truly impact poverty. And you will note that all of these systems don't use the same terminology. So we have no way to really truly capture what's going on with individuals. So what you call somebody at social services may not be what the hospital system calls them, may not be what the school system calls them. It's defined in different ways. There is no common language when it comes to poverty and services. That's another big issue that we need to tackle. It's all systemic. It's all systemic. And so, you know, again, we throw a Band-Aid on stuff, but this is a gaping wound, folks. You know, we need stitches, we need surgery, we need a whole bunch of things in order to crack this nut. Because there is big money in poverty. Just so everybody knows, there is a lot of money in poverty and in programs. Mm-hmm. And as much as the federal government wants to talk about it, and it's not fair for us to be doing these things for folk, and we don't need to be this public welfare system, these folk are getting rich off of poverty. They're getting rich off poor people.
But these jobs in
pardon me?
These jobs in High Point, these companies have to pay a fair wage, meaning not a fair minimum wage, but a fair living wage. So people, when you say people aren't wanting to go back to work or, you know, take these trainings, people, Benita, are tired of working for pennies. People spend all of their days away from their families. People are having other people have to raise their children, daycares, after school programs for pennies. They're barely still been able to pay their bills. And until these CEOs let up off of the money, the revenue coming in, and actually give an equitable higher wage, people don't want to go back to work. That day is over. So you're going to see more of that. People aren't going to want to join those programs.
Hand up too.
Okay, yeah, let me interrupt real quick. We have another question from the panel. Mr. Watts, the floor is yours.
Well, no, I like where Courtney was headed, but I was gonna say, honestly, and I wanted to dovetail with what you were saying earlier, about you know, and like the one concrete suggestion is, you know, maybe some of this money could be used to fix the transportation system. So I just wanted to, you know, dig into that a little bit and discuss with you the difference between, you know, programs and reparations and racial justice. You know, and I definitely applaud any effort to fix the transportation system. High Point effectively doesn't have one. And it would benefit greatly from the establishment of an effective transit system between the Tri-City area. But at the same time, you know, I don't see how that could be confused with reparations, which is, you know, a specific remedy for a specific harm for a specific group of people. You know, I think we do damage to our message when we construe those two things together. You know, so you know, I just want to stress, you know, that I think, you know, it's an error to refer to programs as reparations.
Well, I think though, but I'm not saying necessarily programs, but I will say this. If I can't get from point A to point B because I live in a specific community where there is no transportation to allow that to happen, is that not impactful to me and my ability to be able to make money and raise my family?
Yeah,
So
but
when I
that
look
check
at it
for
and
reparations is gonna give them that. It's gonna give them a car.
it's gonna
Can I interject a point?
They
But
ain't gonna need that
Wait,
bus.
wait,
They
wait,
gonna
wait,
buy
wait,
a bus
wait,
system.
wait,
We
wait,
need
wait,
it. We
wait,
gonna buy a bus system and a train system.
I get that, but you got to
Okay,
start
we
somewhere.
don't need that transportation.
But I think that the way that we currently work, or the way it's currently being done, I'm not saying that's the end all to what that is, but I believe reparations puts the pressure on these folk to provide adequate transportation for our communities. And if the bus doesn't run in my community, or it does run in my community, but it can't get me to Colfax, that's a problem. If it can't get me to East Greensboro where that job is, that's a problem. The job that's going to pay me the $25 an hour to help me take care of my family. That's an issue.
But
And
look
so
at the
it may not
I
be
want
the
to
end
say, I
all.
want to say,
ride public transportation, y'all. Look at the souls. When I look at the bus stop, it's Black people out there. I don't see many white people out there on the
That's
public
true.
transportation. That means we need money for cars. That's what that's telling us.
Can I interject the point also, because I definitely want to second what Ken was saying.
I'm sorry.
It's
Well, hold on. Give me one more second, and then you can go. But I just wanted to say, I think that anything that takes away self-determination, you know, because, you know, every Black person don't have an issue with transportation. You know, every Black person doesn't have the same issue in any walk of life. So I think a real racial justice regime, a reparations regime, you know, is not going to be one that takes away self-determination. The power of oneself to say, okay, well, this is what I'm gonna do with mine. You know, because you got a lot of Black folks who need working capital for a business. You got other Black folks that, you know, may need money so they can get a bond for their construction company. You know, you have Black folks that might choose to get a car or to put a good sized down payment on a house. You know, you can choose. I mean, when you're self-determinate, when you're not robbed of self-determination, you can choose how you want to deploy those resources for the betterment of your particular family and their particular needs.
All right, excellent. All right, hold on.
hold on, Rob.
Let's give
Um,
Thomas a little bit because we're running short on time. I want to make sure we get everyone's perspective in. So Thomas, you're next.
Well, Ken just articulated a good deal of what I wanted to express. So I will say this has been I guess a point of concern for me throughout this whole dialogue. And Ms. Sims, I do want to applaud you for the efforts that you've made in making this an issue for the city of High Point and for the Black community at large. So I don't want to take away from that, but there was one sentence that stuck out from a while back. And it seems it's minor, but to me, in the broader scheme of things, it has a major implication to it. You said, we can talk about reparations all day long, but, and I'm paraphrasing the rest, we need to talk about what our communities look like, what our families look, I mean, I'm paraphrasing. But I guess what I want to say is when you use the word but, it's a very strong word because it has the tendency to negate what came before it. Reparations is not mutually exclusive of the things that you're referring to. In fact, it is inclusive of how we're going to, as Ken so beautifully put it, how we're going to become self-determined in changing the dynamics of our families, of our communities, and so forth. Reparations is not mutually exclusive of the other tangibles that we're owed to as citizens of High Point that pay into this system. It's a debt that needs to be owed. It has to be rectified. And then we discuss the power dynamics and access to resources as they need to be put in place moving forward. I think that's but when we try to compartmentalize the two, as Ken was saying, I think there's a fallacy in that, I believe, you know. And to bring it back full circle, we did say that we were going to discuss the current system of homelessness and destitution in the Black community and talk about how reparations is going to address that. I think we left out a big component. How did the city of High Point play a role in the current state that Black people find themselves in? We need to look at the Housing Act of 1937. What was High Point's role in sidelining Black people from participating in that program? The GI Bills of the 1950s. That relates to me personally. My grandfather fought in the Philippines. He came home to poverty in Norfolk, Virginia. We need to look at the urban renewal programs of the 60s. How did High Point pair? We're all familiar with that. Okay. LBJ's War on Poverty, which was just a way to create the Black welfare state. The Monahan report predicted that 30 years down the line, that's what these programs would eventually do, create a welfare state where Black men were totally shut out of their family. And it would socially re-engineer the Black community. We saw that come to fruition. How did the city of High Point play a role in that? And from that point on, okay, now that when we dissected those pieces, this is why we find ourselves in the current state that we're in. Now, monetarily, what can High Point do to rectify that problem that it created? And moving forward, what needs to be the power relationships that need to exist between High Point, the city as a city entity, and the Black citizens that undergird its growth through our tax dollars?
Thomas, great question. And I just want to say, don't be scared, y'all. And go ahead. Let's hear it.
Well, I'm going to respond to Thomas because everything he said, they were all valid points. And they're all valid things that need to be a part of the conversation as we move forward, and part of the consideration and the research that we do as that commission moves forward to say, these are the recommendations that we think the city of High Point needs to do in order to acknowledge, number one, and then rectify whatever role they played in this. And so I would say that when it comes down to and the dynamic that gets played out when you look at how do you monetize that, I think that question was in the chat, and what is their ability to be able to give all of us a check? See, that's what we got to look at. What's the ability for the city of High Point to give everybody a check? And absent being able to give everybody a check, that's when we start getting into programs. And how do these programs uplift that part of the community? How you specifically target communities for the uplifting and what needs to happen. That's a big conversation. And it's taking place at the state, at the local level, the state level, even the national level around reparations in general. So we got to dig off into that and figure out what all that is. But by the same token, the city of High Point And they're careful in their conversation around this to say, I don't know if you can hold us responsible for stuff that the state put in place. I don't know if you can hold us responsible for something the feds put in place. So these programs that we're talking about are federal programs, and then monies that have come down from the feds to the state with all of these rules and regulations about how the money can be used and what you can and cannot do. So any municipality out here worked at SALT, if it went out there and said, okay, we want to get into this whole urban renewal piece, the money that comes with urban renewal, but guess what? It also came with guidelines. And we, unfortunately, as a people, were not the ones that were. I'm not gonna say we weren't all there, but we didn't have the voices to say, no, you will not carve up my community. No, you will not redirect traffic in our community. No, you will not destroy whole communities to put a highway in place. That's what happened with College Drive. Or what is College Drive at this point? Or University Drive, whatever that is. That was Harrison Street. Vibrant community, you see? But when urban renewal came, it said, we're going to create this highway. Guess what? That's going to impact that community. And people didn't say, they weren't in a position, we weren't in a position to say, no, that's not what we want for our community. And we are our own worst enemies. It's sometimes we sit back and say, yeah, that's progress. We think that's great. We think that's good. Yeah, let's do that. Long term, what did it do? It allowed an HPU to come in and do what it's doing right now. I tie all that back to what happened with urban renewal. You see, so we got to know our history. I'm with you, Tony, on education. We need to know our history and be fluent in it. Not these stories that we hear or, these urban legend things that happen. We need to know, in fact, what our history is. Because that's the only way we're going to get effective reparations, is knowing from whence we came. And we don't know that. I looked at a story the other day on UNC, and they were talking about the Red Cape. I don't know if this was the rebellion or what happened in Wilmington in the 1800s. People go to Wilmington right now and say, I never knew this happened. People live in Wilmington right now and say, I never knew this happened. How could you not know?
Right.
How can you live in Tulsa and not know what happened in Tulsa with Black Wall Street? How could you not know? That's because we don't talk about our history.
And Ms. Sims,
we don't show ourselves approved and informed. That's the only way we're going to get a reparations agenda that truly is going to address and correct the wrongs. But we can't do that if we don't know.
Yeah. And Ms. Sims, let me just clarify so that folks understand. When I say education, I'm not talking about a college degree, high school diploma.
No,
I'm talking about information. I'm talking about knowledge, understanding. Ms. Sims just spoke to urban renewal. How many of us have had the conversation about the impacts of urban renewal? These are things that have to be addressed when we talk about reparations. The systemic systems and processes that have impeded our growth as African Americans in this country. And most of it happened post 1865. We were slaves before that. Most of it happened post 1865 to current. And we need to be educated on these systems, on these platforms that have impeded our growth. Thank you, Ms. Sims. I'm gonna step back, but I just wanted to say that before Courtney spoke.
Okay.
I definitely want to add to what Tony was saying also, because I know we had a brief exchange about when you said that education. I said there are too many broke, educated Black people. I definitely wasn't lost on what you meant by education, though, Tony. I just want to clarify that. But the point of it is that, is I consider myself a pretty enlightened guy. However, I don't have access to the resources and the mechanisms to create the change that I need. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that for 150 years, Black people were forcibly shut out of the economic abundance that they created. And any attempts that they made to get a small piece of it was obliterated through force and through violence.
And Thomas, that's today too. Speak,
And
that's
still-
right now.
No, no,
What you're
no,
saying
exactly,
right now.
exactly. But and definitely, I mean, that's still going on today. I understand that. But when you talk about why we don't teach our history, a lot of you have, I mean, a lot of what we're seeing right now is through trauma. The people that experienced Tulsa, the people that experienced Wilmington, the people who experienced Slocum, Texas, they were traumatized. And there were repercussions, violent repercussions for even speaking on the things that had transpired. I mean, the insurance companies didn't allow them to be they didn't allow indemnification. Anybody that spoke of it was ostracized or even or threatened. So I mean, there's been a climate of intimidation and fear that many of these people lived with for generations. And you know, even to, and you talk to a lot of the old heads here in High Point right now. Many of them are afraid to talk about what the banks did. I was talking to this, I forget that brother's name though. I did an interview with him, and one of the things that came out of his mouth was that he was afraid of upsetting white people. When I asked him to get into specifics about what were some of the things that he's seen go on within the city of High Point that have brought about the economic disenfranchisement of Black people, he literally said he was afraid of offending someone because he so-called had a working relationship with these people. But that stems from trauma. And I've asked him, I said, well, let's consider this, sir. Wouldn't you want your grandchildren, your children and your grandchildren and their children to know what happened so they understand that there's something owed to them?
Okay, let me catch you right there.
But I want to make this one last statement. Just one last statement. You know, this idea, when we talk about us being, and in many degrees, we do undermine ourselves. It's not us that's our greatest enemy. It's a system of white supremacy that instills a climate of fear and self-doubt. That's the enemy. The things we do to each other are just the byproduct. I mean, we get into it's just there's some very dangerous.
Hey, Thomas, I got you, but I gotta get to everybody else.
That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, all right, Courtney, you're next.
Okay, quickly, just to go into, Bernita, you said something profound earlier, and you said that the Bible says that we will be poor, that there will always be poor. Does anyone know William Tyndall in this group? 8 people in this group. Does anyone know William Tyndall?
If you give me a couple of minutes, I can tell you, but no, I don't offhand. No, go ahead.
1493, he was an Oxford scholar. He went to Cambridge University, where he was a professor. He wrote the Bible, okay? So I don't believe that the God we serve is a God that would want his creation to suffer in any shape or form. And I believe that when we refer to this book of the Bible, it is a parable and a fable. I believe that we have been indoctrinated into this for so long that we believed it. However, I believe that the writer benefited from those words and not the actual souls that receive the word each and every day.
Wow, that was heavy, Courtney.
And when we look back at the Pope and the doctrine of discovery, we will see that before slavery, an institution of religion that we follow, that we will fight tooth and nail for when we talk about our Jesus, our God, and our religion. We will fight for that, but we don't even understand that we are literally fighting the oppressor's fight. We have been indoctrinated into something that is going to be so uncomfortable. But the reason the pastors, I feel, won't give us but 5 to 6 minutes is because history, when we are educated, it exposes truths that are deeper than what we even want to expose within our own community.
Wow. Thank you, Courtney. Jason, you're next.
What was I going to say? Oh yeah. Well, I will say first, I would definitely agree with Courtney, but that's not why I raised my hand. But I believe that the Bible was rewritten or retranslated to set us a new societal norm and create guardrails on certain things that may not have been in that, and that have been proven not to be in the original translation of what was the Bible. But that's a different week, a different discussion that I think we're going to have to get into. But the other thing I wanted to say, though, that we were talking about urban renewal, and some of this historical stuff that's went on in High Point, and urban renewal happens to be one of them that I went into. And that's, what I've found is that High Point University has been one of the greatest benefactors of urban renewal. And however, the community still chooses to work with them on stuff like health clinics and this and that. But if we really look at, say the past 10 years, UNC Greensboro has done more for the community in High Point than High Point University has, in my opinion. So I just don't understand the willingness to allow all this to take place. And also, I don't know why that the community, and more specifically the NAACP, has not done more to hold High Point University accountable for the disparities that they have created within the community of High Point. And in my opinion, there's almost a reparation owed from the High Point University to the community in High Point because of some of the housing disparities and, food deserts that have, if there is such a thing as a food desert, but some of the food deserts that they've created, and all the other things that really, we could say that the municipality, the city government has allowed these things to happen, but honestly, the community has allowed these things to happen because the community has a voice, and the community has a responsibility to speak against these things. And that goes back to the NAACP has a responsibility to make the community aware of what's going on, because everything is not known. And as Bernita pointed out, the community needs to know, and the High Point Enterprise is not the paper to tell people what's happening. And I'll say it, and I might get fussed at, but Pat Kimbrough is a joke. I mean, he's a terrible writer. Terrible.
Wait. Hold on now, sir. On this program, we're not disparaging anyone. Everyone has an opinion, and we want to make sure we stick to that program. But I mean, say what you want to say, but we can't disparage anybody because everyone does have something to say. But continue, please.
I'll leave it be with there. I got my hand slapped, so I'm a hush.
Okay, and we do have one more comment from Ms. Reynolds.
Now, listen, Jason, you got me worked up a little bit there because I've heard and read about some information that points to where High Point University has benefited, and we can see that as we drive down or around neighborhoods we used to be able to occupy. But this is where I would follow up behind Ms. Bernita Sims and say we have to stay woke, because HPU does a lot, in our community, for our community. Has anyone come across the Thrive Initiative that's downtown, housed in Congdon Yards? There was a major contribution made by the university, collaboration with the High Point Chamber of Commerce, right? Our elected officials were involved, some of our reverends in the community were involved in this coming to be, and it is an initiative to support entrepreneurs of color, to support the Black people that are trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and do something and take their business to the next level. So we have to pay attention to some of these moves that are being made, because in the same, I hear it all the time when I talk to people in the community. Well, people just don't know, we've done this, the city council members, we've done this, we've done that. HPU can turn around and say, well, we put these many millions of dollars into this institution over here. So we have to make sure that we're paying attention to all these moves that are being made and who's doing what to help the Black people, because everybody's trying to deal with this conundrum of how do we help the Black people. And so when we're talking about reparations and monetizing it, we need to make sure that these programs or these solutions are helping Black people specifically and inclusively, not just the entrepreneurs, right? Not just the single moms, not just the churches, not just the people who don't have cars, not just the homeless. So we have to be strategic and we have to take responsibility for our plan. We can't come to the city and we can't come to these individuals and say, we need something better. Y'all figure it out. We have to make it our responsibility. We have to find the powerful, great minds, strategic thinkers that are Black and are employed in these higher ranking positions that do have power, that do have influence, that have contributed to the building of other industries around us. Okay, we need to devise a plan. And how much is that plan gonna cost? And that's the bill that needs to be paid. So I think it is bigger than just a check. The systemic change has a price tag on it too. And that's our job to create what this solution looks like. And we cannot let HPU off the hook that easy. Well, they did this, or the I've been in a meeting once where we were talking about the food deserts. And I've heard one of our elected officials say, well, we did the Grow High Point project, and we raised these many thousands of dollars of produce, and we have stands where we give this produce away. Well, we all know that's not the same as having establishments that are open for business, where anybody can go any time of day and purchase the food that they need to feed their families in a healthy way. So we have to make sure that we're staying on top of what's happening. The news is not going to tell us. The newspaper's not going to tell us. We have to be nosy. We have to be all up in the business. What y'all doing over there? Who paid for that? So that's my little.
Right. Thank you, Connie. And we have one more comment from Ms. Sims, and then I will close out. Ms. Sims.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, this is awesome, y'all, because we talking. And I think anytime you're communicating and you're talking, that's good stuff. Because when we're in these conversations, there's room in there for all of us to learn something we didn't know. That's how I see it. So you should learn something new when we're involved and engaged in these conversations every time we do it. The second thing is that, when I served on council, I was a thorn in the side of High Point University, because my whole thing is you're going to be transparent about what you're doing, and we're going to keep you honest. So you can't go in and create plans about how you want to grow your university without informing the people that it's going to impact that is coming. And unfortunately for us, a lot of that housing around High Point University was rental property, which means the individuals living in that property didn't really have a voice in what the owners decided they wanted to do for the benefit of High Point University. And in Bloomberg reports, Nito Quabain referred to the growth of the university and what was going on in and around the university as urban cleansing. Y'all think about that.
Oh,
Urban cleansing. Okay. So when we start looking at how we move forward with this, what we're doing and where we're going and where we are in this whole reparations conversation, I don't think we leave anything off the table. No matter how innocuous it may sound, no matter how ridiculous somebody would say, well, that just doesn't make any sense. But y'all can figure it out. And if you need some help, we can help you figure it out.
Mhm.
See, that's where we need to go in this. And at the same time, don't let our community off the hook as being, well, we don't think this well, this is what needs to happen for Black people. Well, okay, we get it. That's your piece of this. But that's when I go back and say sometimes we're our own worst enemies, because there are individuals who have I'm not gonna say they've thrived, but they've benefited in this environment that we're in. And so to them, when you start talking about the impact that it's had on the community, they don't see themselves in that role.
Correct.
They don't see themselves as being non-beneficiaries of what this is, because they managed to thrive in spite of all this other stuff, because the white community has always had their favorite Black people over here to control the thought process of the masses. I can tell you stories about how this process works. So I just think that our mantra needs to be stay woke in this process, because it's still going to happen in spite of our best efforts for it not to happen. We can have a commission that's sitting out here doing this work, but that there are backdoor conversations going on, and there are other people saying, well, I was in a meeting and they see it. I'm just letting you know. Okay, so I just want us to continue to have these types of conversations. We need to continue to be in the mix as it relates to bringing information back to our community, and to Tony's point, educating people about the backstories and what is going on behind closed doors, and conversations that are taking place outside of the norm of where we are right now. We got to be really, really conscious of what that is. And we can elect people all day long that come in with an agenda, and trust and believe in 4 years that agenda gets co-opted and it gets changed. So our job as the NAACP is to make sure that what we've started, we stay involved in it. And if we don't think that commission is going in the right direction, we need to say it. I don't care who sits there. I don't care what that representation looks like. Hold people's feet to the fire and make them be honest in the discussion and where we're going. That's all I can say. So again, I appreciate all of you let me come on and talk and use my soapbox for this purpose. I'm telling you, I can go somewhere in these conversations, but I appreciate you let me speak, and hopefully we can continue this conversation around other things that impact our community as we move through this reparations piece. I know that that's the hot thing we're talking about right now, but trust and believe that all the stuff that's going on in our community, it touches on reparations. And that's part of the education piece that needs to take place while we're having all of these discussions. So y'all bring some stuff in. Let's make some good trouble.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. Thank you, everyone that joined us today. I think we had a great podcast today. I do want to mention one thing, that there is a meeting of the City Council on Monday that will be, addressing the High Point resolution, or the NAACP's resolution for reparations. If anybody could get there, please get there. If you need any additional information, contact the NAACP of High Point. The website is highpointnaacp.org. I just want to say, thank you for Ms. Sims for coming out, sharing her incredible, knowledge and information on what happens in this city. I want to thank the panel for coming out, because again, you guys come out every week, great questions, great energy, because these are the things that, as Ms. Sims alluded to, we want to have these conversations, and we can help each other, the old, the young, the new, and those individuals that don't even know. I want to, put out there again, for anyone who wants to join us here at Reparations, you can go to the website for highpointnaacp.org. You can come to city council meetings. We're here every Saturday, 10 to 12, to talk about reparations and to get ideas, to share experiences, and to hopefully bring about some solutions that can benefit our community. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I wish you all a great weekend. Do we have any requests from our weekly thought for the week, Ms. Constance?
Oh, yes. I want us to think about, and I have to do the same myself, addressing our council person for the ward that we live in, because we've been having some very impactful conversations. Maybe we should invite someone to join us. But let's reach out. Let's start reaching out. Let's start doing the things, making it our business to speak up and speak out and ask our reps to join this conversation, because they're not opposed to what we're doing. So that's my suggestion.
Everybody, the council agenda is online, usually the Thursday before the meeting, and also the minutes from previous meetings that they've had. So I would say, let's go online, pull those agendas down, look at what they're doing, pay attention. The meeting can be joined virtually. You don't have to pick up and go into council chambers to actually review what they're doing and what they're talking about. But I would say, let's be aware of the conversations that are taking place and how they're spending money that comes into our community that could be targeted towards maybe making a difference in some of these highly impacted communities that we have. So ARPA funding, they're still trying to consider what to do with it. And I think we should have a voice in how that money is being spent. Every time they get money, we're in the number. I just want you to know that. So they start talking about how many African Americans there are, how many people living in poverty that there are, how many people this, how many people that. That becomes a part of the grant application. So if you're going to use us to apply for the money, you definitely need to be giving us the money that you used us for. And so we've got to start talking that language. But I would encourage everybody, go to the website, pull up the agenda, look at what's on that agenda and what's being considered when they're going into those council meetings. So I think it's important to know where they're going and what they're doing.
Yep,
Thank you.
I
absolutely.
encourage everyone to punish the sinner.
And one comment, I might have made a wrong email. I'm sorry, a website address. It's highpointnAACP.org. So again, anyone wants to get involved, you got comments, you want to come to the meetings, highpointnAACP.org.
Hey, Rob,
Yes, sir.
NAACP High Point.
Okay.
.org. They got NAACP first. That's why I wanted to let them know, not High Point.
Okay.
NAACP. Just so we get them to the right place. But hey, they can find us. They can find us.
Jason, you have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing real quick. I know we talked a lot about city council, and I think it's important, but also I think it's important to note that there are a lot of boards within the city where work is done and conversations are had and that's where some of the conversation starts before it gets to council. Sometimes. So I think it's good maybe to look at some of those things as well and see see what those conversations are. Just as a thought.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's hit on that and what Ms. Constance has put out, because I think they're both great points. But that's going to be for next week's, guys. I want you guys to have a great weekend. Thanks for coming out. And, as always, Reparations Saturdays, guys. Have a good weekend.